Welcome, everybody. We are so excited for the conversation today. My name is Shruti Katari, and I'm the founder of Women of Community. I'm going to get into what Women of Community is in just a second. You know, the conversation today is all about building inclusive pipelines. And when we look at the statistics, people of color, especially women of color, get it's hardest for them to raise capital, essentially. And when they do, they raise the less funds than their other counterparts. And so a question to you all, if you can drop in the chat, what do you think is the biggest barrier for people of color and women of color in raising capital? We are going to make a word cloud with your answers and share it with you a little bit later on in the event. And we are also going to be asking our panelists this same question. So as I mentioned, I am the founder of Women of Community. I've worked as a frontline health educator, quality improvement leader. I've worked in startup operations, venture capital, really a sprinkling across healthcare, and have just noticed that you don't see a lot of women of color in leadership positions. McKinsey does an annual report on women in healthcare as of 2020, end of it, only 4% women of color in senior leadership positions. While white women are underrepresented, women of color are virtually non-existent. And so I launched Women of Community, which is really focused on increasing representation of women of color in leadership positions within healthcare. And we do a few things in our advocacy. We do quarterly events. We have a video series. We have a weekly social media campaigns. So on the side, you'll see what those 3 weekly campaigns are. And we have a newsletter. So please do follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Women of Community. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter through our website. So we would love to have you as a part of our community. And a shout out to Elaine Chang and Diana Rios, who are on this line, who are a part of the WC crew and the backbone. So I'm going to hand this now off to Kathryne. Our 2 other hosts for this event are CTIP and Health Tech DEI.
Hey guys, super excited to be here, and thanks Shruti for the awesome introduction, and really excited to chat with the ladies on this panel about a very, very important topic. So I'll be brief. CTIP is the West Coast Consortium for Technology and Innovation in Pediatrics, where I am co-director with an amazing team, some of which are on the call today. We are a medtech accelerator centered at Children's Hospital Los Angeles that helps pediatric device innovators from concept to commercialization. So pediatrics is an underserved market, and in medtech, it's no exception. So we're here to help startups with connections and capital. So you can follow us at West Coast CTIP on Instagram or Twitter, or contact us on our website. And now I'd also like to tell you about Health Tech DEI. I'm the founder of Health Tech DEI. My other founder, Dr. Juan Espinoza, is here on the call supporting us as a male ally. So shout out to Juan. So we bring DEI to investment strategy through lived experience. As Shruti brought up, women of color, women, Black and Latinx individuals receive significantly less funding in terms of raising capital for their startups. And we'd like to change that with Health Tech DEI, focused on the health tech industry. So specifically changing the industry to help accelerate a shift to more equitable investing practices. And we do that by working with organizations who are allocating capital around strategies that they can implement to invest in more underrepresented and diverse founders. So please follow us on Twitter at Health Tech DEI. And if this is something you're interested in, or you think your organization would be interested in knowing more about, please fill out a contact form on the web.
First of all, it's not very often I find myself on a panel with all women of color. This is really awesome. And not just that, you all are badass investors, founders who've raised capital, and we have a lot to learn from you. And as I was scrolling through your bios, I was like, there's no way I could do it justice myself in talking about all of you and your pathways and how you've gotten to where you have. So I thought, why don't we kick off this panel with each of you just spending a minute or two talking about who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your journey. And if you can specifically mention some risks you had to take and rules you had to break to get to where you've gotten to. Jessica, why don't we start with you?
Ooh, was hoping you wouldn't start with me. Thinking through all the risks I've taken. I'm Jessica Salinas, very happy to be here. I am currently the Vice President of Investments at New Media Ventures. We are an early stage seed fund that invests in activists and entrepreneurs that are really, working to address democracy's biggest challenges. But it hasn't been an easy path getting here to where I'm at now. I think, first and foremost, I am the daughter of immigrants. I am from Texas, so all my family is in Texas. And, my life has been defined, I think, by unplanned choices and risk. I think back to when my first big risk that I took was going to school. I'm the first in my family to go to college, and I left without the support of my parents. I bought my own one-way ticket to a little school in the Bay Area, which is I have the Bay back here, and didn't look back. I decided that was something that I needed to do for myself and also for my family. And that was really difficult to do as the only woman in a Mexican, family. I have 3 brothers. I was raised in a very religious home. And I think that was probably the biggest risk that I've taken very early on, and since then it's just become a habit. So I think back to when I left for business school. I'm currently in LA. I remember I had taken guardianship of my younger brother, and he was living with me in the Bay. I had my niece up there, and this was going to be the first time that I was doing something for myself. I wasn't going to have a job. I was like, I can really focus on school now. My brother's at a good age. I feel good about this. And just getting so much pressure from my family to be like, well, what about your niece? And what about your brother? And me deciding that I needed to do this for myself. And, I again, got my stuff, left to LA, and I'm still here actually. But it's been very challenging. My brother got arrested a few weeks later, right after I left. And there was a lot of guilt and a lot of, shame, I think, that came with that, and having to work through that. And I think a fun risk that I've taken has been really being unapologetically myself in business school, and being able to stand up to the professors and really push them on why we weren't being represented in the curriculum and in the business cases that were being shown to us as kind of the standard or the blueprint for what to do. That actually led me to meeting the CEO of Headspace, just being outspoken in one of the courses and pushing back, and got me a job that was created for me at Headspace, where I eventually got to create this social impact team and founded the first social impact team at Headspace, and was also part of their founding B2B team. So I think those are just a little bit of the risks, but like I said, I feel like it's a habit now.
I love that. There's so many things represented in your story that I think that we don't often hear when we see a successful investor. So thank you for sharing that. Grace, how about you next?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you for having me. My name is Grace Chang. I'm the founder, CEO, principal software engineer for Kintsugi. And we are based here in Berkeley, California. And at Kintsugi, we are very excited to be building smarter mental health care infrastructure, where we're using voice biomarkers to measure and predict well-being. Our team had recently been awarded $3.5 million of National Science Foundation SBIR awards to develop new artificial intelligence technology. And I'm proud to say that we've reached a new technical milestone where we're now able to score clinical depression and anxiety from less than 20 seconds of free-form speech. It certainly has not been an easy path to get here, as I'm sure you'll hear from other members of this panel. Myself, I am an immigrant to the United States. I was born in Taiwan, and the journey to the US was certainly fraught with a lot of challenges, especially since my family growing up was not very well to do. but certainly have learned a lot. I think in the path to getting to where I'm at today, it is, I couldn't feel more blessed in so many ways, but it has definitely been challenging being a woman in tech. And you will see a lot of Asian Americans in tech, no doubt about it, but in terms of leadership roles, particularly for female Asian women, almost never in the executive roles. And so I've had a number of harrowing sort of experiences of being told that, I really should really, stay in my place, stay in my lane, that automatically I'm typecasted as a subservient sort of member of the team, and that, sometimes despite even my technical qualifications, sometimes relegated to being pigeonholed as maybe even an assistant for the CEO when we're talking about being like a second engineering member of the team and head of product. And so I think a lot of these have characterized my experience in tech, which has really shaped who I've wanted to partner with in building Kintsugi, who is another woman of color and somebody who deeply understands some of those impediments that have been kind of thrown in the pathway of trying to just build something that really addresses a pain point for everyone. And so really happy to be here today. I am so encouraged by the fact that this panel is happening today, that people care about these issues, and really delighted to answer any questions anybody has.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Grace. Kathryne.
Hey guys, long time me not talking, but I'm super excited to be introducing myself again. I was admittedly getting a little nervous because normally what I do on panels is I pitch our organization, which we founded, started, and built, and very rarely pitch myself directly. But I really appreciate the personalized stories from Shruti, Jessica, and Grace. So I will try to do an abbreviated version of the same, given I don't normally practice this, even though it's about my own life. So I'm a native Angelino. I grew up here in Los Angeles. I went to that little school in the Bay that Jessica described as well, which is Stanford, and that is the most Stanford response ever. To say like I went to a small liberal school in Northern California. But that being said, Stanford was a great experience. And it was kind of my first time out of my little bubble of Los Angeles, in which this sounds really silly being a Black woman, where I realized that folks at Stanford had not necessarily seen people who were brown, and this was like different or confusing to them. And so I grew up in a very diverse area and a very microcosm of LA, where we had a little bit of everybody. And so to some of the, I think Grace and Jessica did a great job of sharing actual kind of stories. And so, you get comments like, "Oh, Kat, that's so weird. Like, you don't really act Black." And you're like, "Oh, okay. What does that mean?" And then they can't really explain. And then it gets a little bit awkward. But besides that, Stanford was a lovely experience. I majored in human biology. I was pre-med. And then I went to medical school at USC. So Shruti, you asked us to say some kind of big leaps that you've taken. So I'm the person who did 3 years of medical school and then left. So I did med school, but no MD. And what to do after med school was definitely kind of a big question mark, right? I had been on this train for a number of years and thought that this is what I was going to do. I was the daughter of a pediatrician and neonatologist. I grown up in and around medicine. And it's not that it was an expectation, but I just thought that that's what I was going to do. And so long story short, the life of a practicing clinician wasn't for me. So what do you do with a Stanford degree and 3 quarters of med school? I started working in health tech startups, first in super nerdy kind of clinical science roles, transitioned into strategy and business development, had to learn along the way what that even meant. One thing I do is I'll just kind of jump in and decide like, yes, I can do this, like full confidence. And that can be anything from like giving my fiance a haircut in COVID times, which I was really, really confident that I could do. And then when faced with clippers, which I had never used before, my confidence just sunk, to putting myself for positions that I hadn't done before, whether they be product management or business strategy because I thought I could, and I thought I could figure it out along the way. And so that persistence, I think, helps kind of, instead of waiting for someone to open the door, I tried to squeeze through a crack. Now I help co-run CTIP with a lovely and incredible team, some of which who are on this call. You could say being the daughter of a pediatrician to now leading a medtech accelerator focused on pediatrics. It seems like a very straight line, but it's more of a kind of curvy, bumpy road. And I'm very thankful to work with a colleague I went to medical school with, Dr. Espinoza, who is now, in fact, a physician and a badass running CTIP. And I think Jessica said something also really interesting about the cases and case studies in business school. So what I left out of my story is I went back because I'm a sucker for school and also went to business school, also at USC. And this past year, in fact, a couple months ago, Marshall published a business case on CTIP, specifically highlighting myself and our emphasis on diversity in medtech. And never did I, going to business school, did I think I would be the subject of a case study that, you know, kids everywhere, if they want to learn about science, are going to read. I'll drop that link into the chat. But it was really transformative for me having to go through my story of more eloquently than I have on this call about what it took to get where I am. And the fact that Jessica pointed out is that lots of students never see themselves reflected in a case. And the fact that all of us on this panel, who are all women of color, could go through graduate school and absolutely never read about someone who is like us is incredible in a terrible way, when other people never have to do the mental shift to imagine themselves in, let's say, the white male CEO role, which you typically read about. So I'm not one to really be that public about sharing my story, but now it's all over, I guess, the Harvard Business Publishing. But it was great. And I hope that someone will read it and think, okay, like this, I'm kind of like Kathryne and maybe I can do this too. So I'll stop that very long intro and get to Shruti's questions.
I love that. And this is, Kathryne, that was so beautifully put. And that's exactly why I asked this question. I think the narrative of what an investor looks like, the narrative of what a founder looks like, you don't often see the stories reflected of what we just kind of went through. And one of my personal missions and Women of Community's mission is to elevate these stories and to increase that representation out there. Because if I hear one more story about the white guy who left Google because he had an idea on a napkin and then raised 20 million, I think I just might just die. So this is awesome. All right, so diving into some of the questions, I would love to actually bring up the word cloud that we asked our audience of what we thought were the biggest barriers. All right, let's see here. So we have getting big funders as the top one, but lack of trust, personal finances, lack of diversity and confidence looks like some of the biggest ones. Competition is also up there, which that is also really real in terms of competing folks for the capital. Not valued, I like that one. So I wanted to, one, just get a pulse from the participants. And now would like to kind of ask the same question to you all on the panel, but maybe first with Grace, want to think through, you know, of course, we all know the statistics that people of color, especially women of color, get the least amount of funding and less likely to get funding generally. So what that means essentially is when we think about early stage kind of fundraising, there are a lot of different ways in which to go about it. And what I've seen from women of color founders is really incredible creative ways to raise that capital. Can you tell us a little bit more about how much have you all been able to raise? How have you been able to raise that capital, that journey?
Most definitely. So many of the words in that word cloud resonates with me personally because in the very early phases of raising capital for your company, so much of it rests on the team, and a lot of the ability for investors, which are predominantly male and white, if you don't talk like them, if you don't look like them, there is going to be a little bit of inherent mistrust or not even really an ability to hear what you have to say. We have raised about $8 million to date, And $3.5 million started with National Science Foundation SBIR grants. $1.5 million was related to a pre-seed earlier this year, and the balance has been in a bridge just actually by the end of this week. And the path to get there is really hard. I won't sugarcoat that aspect of it whatsoever. It is really hard. But the benefit is that the closer you get to Series A and Series B, where they are more metrics oriented, that's where you can kind of cut a corner and shine. Because at the end of the day, for women founders who have to pitch where maybe a fraction of what they have said is even being heard, when you have the proof in how well your business is going, there's a certain point where if you can be so good that you can't be ignored, that of course is, the ideal outcome, but it takes quite a bit of pain, I would say, to get there. And as an example of this, just this time last year, my co-founder, I think Rima is on the call, she was pregnant with her second child, and in the Zoom call pitches, we had to actively hide her pregnancy. And when we were pitching at that stage, it was really challenging. And I remember when Rima did finally have ISOLU, the next day she was back on investor calls with me. And no one would expect that of like a white male counterpart, bar none. But because we were both immigrants and we know how to work and we have always been workhorses, this was not uncommon for us. It was definitely a struggle, and now we can look back and kind of, thank our lucky stars that we don't have to be in that sort of bucket anymore. But that sort of, hardship in getting to where we're at today is certainly not lost on us. And I think the best that we can do for other founders out there is just to create more room and a pathway for others to be successful, because we certainly know as immigrants, there are a lot of things that kind of put you behind in terms of whatever that starting line looks like for everyone else. And anything that we can do to help other women of color and other people of color and other, folks that just don't necessarily have that same sort of shot, like that is something that is definitely near and dear to both of us.
I love that. We do need to make more room. And that's a really good segue to the investors on the panel here. Jessica, New Media Ventures has a really interesting model, unlike most venture funds. And you're really trying to shift the structures of power and fund more women of color. Can you tell us more about that? What does that look like? What does your work look like?
Yeah, I think you mentioned our really big goal that we have. We have this goal to shift power, right? And specifically progressive power. So when you have such a large vision, you just can't limit yourself to a particular or like a narrow structure or business model or idea, right? That's just a disservice to your mission and your vision. And if you think like historically, profit and purpose and business and impact were seen as these mutually exclusive concepts. That's why so many incredible leaders view the nonprofit sector as the only avenue for change. And we lost a lot of talent to the nonprofit, not lost. The nonprofit sector gained a lot of talent, incredible talent, right? And we're recently seeing this rise of social enterprises and other interesting business models that want to be impactful and that are looking to change the world. So I think using history as our basis, we have to be open to the idea that there are probably other models out there that exist or will continue springing up that we just don't know about yet or we haven't seen yet. And I think that's why our funding structure is flexible. It's by design. Our primary goal is to get the right support to the founders. And, we believe that change comes in different shapes and sizes, and that's reflected in our structure, which is we fund all types of organizations. We are able to fund C3, so nonprofits, C4s, which are a little bit more political. We're able to fund for-profits. We're able to fund 427s. So we're really flexible in that way. And sometimes, our own donors and investors are like, why is it so complicated? It's like, because it has to be, it has to be this way if we're really going to achieve this mission. And, at the core of our work is equity. And like we said, this building this progressive power. And to truly do that, we can't forget and we must include women of color, right? Specifically Black, Latinx, and Indigenous women who are the backbone of our democracy and have demonstrated that over and over and over again, even up to the last election, right? So we at NMB, we're intentional about our efforts to fund these types of founders across our 3 investment sectors. And we deeply focus on, making sure that we're able to fund women of color and reflect the values and our goal in our portfolio.
That. And Kathryne, CTIP, Health Tech, DEI, you support many diverse founders in your portfolio as well, but would love for you to share a little bit more about how you also are sort of working to shift the structures of power, fund more women of color, and even if there's any sort of learnings from your portfolio of creative ways people are raising capital.
So that's really interesting. I think Grace touched on some of that. So she has 2 million or 3 million, I can't remember the number, in non-dilutive capital from an NSF grant. And so our CTIP portfolio companies have raised over 10 million, but under 15 million in SBIR and STTR grants. And those are in very large amounts. So that's non-dilutive capital for research from NSF, NIH, et cetera. And that's for at least med tech companies or those in kind of technical research fields, an incredible way to raise, because that can be equivalent to someone's pre-seed round at $2 million. And you don't have to give up any equity, and it's great. You can just sit and innovate. So we found that that's very, very effective. In addition, some of our companies are running crowdfunding campaigns on Republic or other platforms, but a lot of them are also looking at research partnerships and how they can work there. This is specific to that we're in healthcare and med tech. So I think when you think about our CTIP founders, and we have just under 100, I think it's 98 or 99 portfolio companies, about 15 different states. Pediatrics is a subset of med tech, and peds is small. So if you're innovating in peds, you have a specific reason why you chose to do that. And so I think that motivates our founders to really get creative around where they find capital, but specifically, what do you need at the time to accelerate your innovation or device? And so in terms of CTIP adding to the diversity of our portfolio, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think our portfolio is over 30% people of color, over 60% of our founders are women. I don't have the Venn diagram of exactly where that overlaps for women of color. But considering we're in med tech, which is mostly old and mostly white in terms of general statistics for founders, and we're in pediatrics, if we can find a very diverse portfolio, then I think anyone can. And so we changed our attitude to what does a founder look like? And in terms of evaluating a founder, what do we actually need to evaluate the solution? We're dealing with companies that are at the concept stage, at the early prototyping stage. So they're, idea to maybe they have something that works. Do we need the team to come on and do a pitch with a pitch deck? We decided no, because some people are very good at pitching, and we can teach our companies in our accelerator how to pitch. But do you need to pitch well to CTIP? Not necessarily, because we can find other ways to evaluate you, whether that's in a narrative form or just having kind of a little chat about your company, because we think that that excludes founders who don't have a certain level of access or experience. And it doesn't necessarily exclude, like, just because you're excluding people who don't pitch well doesn't necessarily mean you're excluding bad ideas. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So we really, from the beginning in terms of when a company interacts with us at CTIP to the end of when they're accepted into the portfolio, we really thought about all the levels of bias that could come into play, whether that's making applying to CTIP publicly accessible on our portfolio and running everyone through the exact same process. So whether you're a friend of mine, or I just met you, or you don't know anyone on our team, that doesn't influence how we're evaluating you, because we put everybody through the same funnel. And it's very standard every time, so we can try to minimize bias in that regard. So that's about CTIP. In terms of health tech DEI, so we did research last year with the California Healthcare Foundation around strategies to invest in more Black, Latinx, and female founders, specifically in health tech. From that, we did lots of key informant interviews with founders and investors, some of which who are on this Zoom. And we found that moving the needle in terms of the allocation of capital, we can, raise our flag and say, hey, underrepresented founders need more money, but we need to understand the business case around changing that narrative from both the LP and the GP side of why that makes sense. And then helping funds, firms in the industry really make those big steps, as Jessica alluded to. For new media ventures, they have big goals. So if our goal for health tech DEI is to change the industry of how capital is allocated, we need to work with those capital allocators around that, as opposed to just saying that investing in underrepresented founders is important. It is important, but people need to understand the next step of how to actually implement and do that. And similar to what we've done, at CTIP, and that was through some trial and error. It's not like we got to over half of our portfolio being female founders easily, but we put ourselves out there. We think that we can find health tech innovators anywhere. And so that can be at JP Morgan, that can be on a random Zoom, that can be anywhere. And by broadening our networks, we broaden the types of individuals we come into contact with, and that really diversified our portfolio. So I'll stop there.
That's awesome, Kathryne. And fun fact, that research is how Kathryne and I met. She interviewed me, and then we ended up spending like literally 3 hours just chatting, and we're like, we should be friends in real life. I love it. And folks listening, we are going to get to Q&A in just a little bit. So as you're listening to our amazing panelists and questions are coming into your mind, please drop that into the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to your questions in just a bit. The next question I have for you all, and it's really about shout outs, because I think shout outs are super important. Something that comes up often, we want to be inclusive, but the comment usually comes up of, well, there just aren't a lot of people of color in this space. There just aren't a lot of women of color in this space. And that's not true, because if you ask anybody of color in the space, they can name 7 other people that are in the space. So this is something that we do on all of our events and in our video series, all the things. Who would all of you like to give a shout out to? Other women of color, investors, founders, that people on this call should start following immediately. So Grace, I'm gonna let you kick it off.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's funny because if people say that they don't know any women of color to give shout outs, maybe they need to open up their circles a little bit more. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation. So 2 that come right up to the top of my mind. The first is my co-founder, Rima Silova Olsen. She is such an incredible woman, mother, founder. She's an incredible engineer, and she just has so much gusto in every ounce of effort that she puts out there. You should definitely follow her on LinkedIn or Twitter. She is really driving a lot of the frontier in our machine learning efforts that is transforming access to mental health care. And so I have such deep respect for her, and so glad that she's my co-founder, and I'd like to give her a shout out. The other shout out that I would like to give is for a woman I also deeply respect, a woman of color. Her name is Rushi Sangvi. She has put together a community in San Francisco called South Park Commons. And what I will mention just in general for those who are entrepreneurial on the call is to find your communities, because communities are what help kind of move your startup forward. It's not so much just you thinking, at home, like just trying to get through things. It really is the community lift that allows you to do that. And Rishi Sangvi was one of the first female engineers at Facebook. And she now has a small fund in San Francisco where she brings together really wonderful people who just want to think about what their next big thing will be. It doesn't have to be in startups, it can be in research, and just allowing for the ability to kind of dive into the deep end and be around other people who feel that way, and just, again, making a community available such that that can take place makes a big difference. And for us in the early days of trying to figure out like what our fundraising strategy would look like, how other founders have been able to get into different accelerators or different types of opportunities to further broaden your community and networks, the very tight-knit community there really was a great forcing function for us to understand how other really great operators build their business, how other venture and ex-venture folks think about investing into companies, and the really cool research that just kind of allow people to put their full personality out there, which sometimes we feel can be sorely missing if you're maybe stuck in a big machine or a big corporate sort of entity where you don't feel that you can be or bring your full self. So those two shout outs are definitely top of mind.
That's awesome. And keep checking the comments to folks who are listening. We're popping in links to all the people that folks are mentioning. Kathryne.
So I have 3 shout outs, although I could go on. And to echo what Grace said, those when they ask, do you know women of color in blank, and someone comes up with that, it's you need to do better. So one is Dr. Sienna Litherwood. She's a friend from medical school. She's a rheumatologist who is now the director of clinical research at Gilead Sciences. So she went from working on rheumatic disease to trying to cure rheumatic disease with working for a pharma company, and she's absolutely incredible. And also has an MPH that she just threw on during residency because no big deal. Why not 2 degrees? Or I guess 3 if you count undergrad. And then the other 2 women I'd like to shout out are specifically on our CTIP team. So again, when people say that, medtech teams aren't diverse, ours is, both in terms of gender, race, if you cut it basically like almost any type of way. We have folks who identify lots of different ways in the CTIP team, and I think that makes us better than the sum of our parts. And so one of which is Salima Jamal, who is our program administrator for CTIP. She is amazingly running the back end of this Zoom and keeps the trains running on time for us. And the other is Nadine Afari, who is our program associate at CTIP, specifically specializes in research and development for biotech and medtech, and is an incredible resource. Specifically, she puts on all our educational webinars for our CTIP team. And both of them are bright lights, incredibly bright, and really have changed the trajectory of our accelerator and how we support portfolio companies. So I really want to double down on those shout outs. And I would have picked people, but they were also on this Zoom, so I couldn't.
I love that. Thanks, Kathryne. That's awesome. And thank you, Salima, for running the back end and making sure this is all working. Jessica.
Yes, I have a couple. I could also go on like Kath said, but I worked really hard to narrow these down. The first is Melody Estrada, and she's a close friend. I had the opportunity to work with her when we were building out the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative out of Stanford's business school. It was what we called the post-accelerator for Latinx businesses to scale. And she was kind of like my ride or die there. We were a very small team. We went through a lot, and everyone I think here is familiar. When you're with a very small team, you wear many hats and you become really close with the person you're spending most of your days with. with. But since then, she has gone on to become a fierce advocate for Latinx and Black entrepreneurs. She created an entire blog series last year during the pandemic to elevate the stories of Black and Latinx owned businesses, and really kind of corralled the community around these businesses that were struggling or had hit some type of roadblock in the midst of the pandemic, and was able to get real results very quickly. And I think that speaks to, her heart. She was doing this in addition to, her full-time job. She's currently the new program manager at Grid 110, which is an incubator accelerator here in LA, and is continuing her work to support entrepreneurs and is always sharing resources. So follow her. And the second is, to build on Grace's point about finding your community. And I want to build on that because I talked about this a few months ago about the importance of peer mentorship and peer support within your industry. So what you don't know is that Kat and I have a very active group chat in this VC world, and it includes a good friend of ours, Jennifer Richard, and she's an amazing Black woman in the VC world, and has also in her own industries and her own ventures advocated for investing and for backing and taking the risks on people of color, and continues to do that work, and is also just a good person to vent to and is very encouraging, and just became a Kaufman Fellow. So go Jen. So those two.
That's awesome. And Kathryne and I also are on a very active group chat. I'm a little jealous right now, but it's okay.
I love a group chat. So texting is my love language, I suppose. We can all have a group. Well, actually, no, we all have a group chat anyway now, because we all had a prep group chat before this Zoom.
That's great.
So, it's how I think, but Grace said it really pointedly in terms of finding your community. And so to give the backstory of Jessica, Jennifer, and I finding each other, we were at a women's investors event in which we were the only brown people. And I think I saw them standing in the shade and said, hey, maybe this is a group I want to talk to. And through that, sending a couple random memes. But then that relationship evolved over time into different positions, all within investment, but still different roles, different companies, different milestones, celebrating each other's success. And so you kind of never know what that goes. And you want someone who's kind of in your same journey, even if they're not on your same team, immediate team.
That's very well said, Kathryne. So before we head into audience Q&A, one last question for the panel, which is for folks on the line who are looking either to become an investor, get investment, trying to make the leap to becoming a founder, what advice do all of you have for these folks?
So in terms of those who want to become investors, so ask yourself, why do you want to become an investor? And all answers are okay. You don't need some sort of very scripted answers, but truly ask yourself, if you're going to make this leap and to make this, your kind of career and be involved in a fund for a 10-year term, et cetera, what's motivating you? Because that's going to get you through the little things of not everything is companies pitching to you and super exciting. A lot of it is a lot of minutia. And then after you've answered your why, I would suggest this to anyone getting in any career, but informational interviews are key. Just like we all have our little group texts and social connections, find others who are in your same position who also want to get into the investment community, share resources, networks, and really just share without the expectation that you'll get anything back, because the community is both big and small. And I think you'll learn a lot from your peers, even if you're not actively in an investing role just yet. So I'll stop there.
For founders on the call, this is definitely an incredible journey. It is a process of getting to know yourself and the things that you feel most strongly about. So if there is any advice, please do stay true to yourself and enjoy the journey. I think it is one that is unlike anything else. And I think you will, if you enjoy the journey, we'll find really great people to work with along the way.
Kathryne took mine, which is ask yourself why. Ask yourself why and really dig deep into what's the reason. Is it because it's the cool thing to do? Is it because it aligns with your values? Is it because you find it interesting and fun? Because it's a hard road, especially as a woman of color. And if you aren't grounded in your why, it's going to be really difficult to succeed and to make it through. And that goes along with, having your peers network and whatnot, but you have to really commit to it and always remind yourself on really hard days, right, why you're there. So that's kind of step one. The second one is ask for help. I think I learned that probably later in life and wish I had learned it earlier, but also a cultural thing, right? But really ask for help. People want to help, and you just need to approach them and be clear about what you're looking for and be genuine. And I think that goes to the third one, is be unapologetically yourself. So don't get into something that is going to compromise who you are, compromise your values, compromise your beliefs, and yeah, continue to be you and be true to yourself.
Nobody asked me for my opinion, but I'm going to give it. My advice would be, I think, right, like exactly what you said, be unapologetically you. I think when you are different, you may think that you need to change yourself in order to fit in and progress, but really the right opportunities will happen for you because you are yourself. And so I know in my own experiences working in health tech and venture, there have been plenty of people who have tried to diminish who I am because it doesn't really fit in with I think what's like the norm basically in the industries, like small things like people making fun of me because I couldn't say idioms right. English was not my first language, PS, but whatever, that's fine. But there's lots of different things that are uniquely me that may have rubbed people the wrong way because they just didn't understand it or whatever, potentially threatened by it, who knows? But all of those things have allowed me to be successful in my career. So as all of you listening are navigating your own careers and you get that sort of those digs, those microaggressions, which they don't feel very micro, they feel really aggressive sometimes. Know that, you have soldiers behind you, like all of us, find your community, like Grace said, and really self-resiliency is really, really important because the world needs your talents. But with that, let's move on to the Q&A. For the founders, so Grace, what made you take a leap into starting your own business? What exactly inspired you to make that leap?
Definitely. I have started businesses previously, so I'm not new to starting something on my own. And I think even from the first time that I started my own business, it was because I guess in some ways I felt like I could never fit into a big, large corporation because I was too opinionated and I just could not stay where I was supposed to be. And at my last company, it was funny because I wasn't really looking to start a new company. I am almost 40 years old at the end of this year, which is kind of wild to be starting a startup. And I guess, screw all convention. And I had an intern who was just really clever. And sometimes, people can see kind of outside of your own sort of day-to-day. And she had mentioned to me as I was thinking of departing this rocket ship of this other company that I was at, to start another company. And I said, Ronnie, that's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Why would I start a new company? I've been through that before and it's just like such a grind. But there was something there. And I think based on having experienced a personal problem that I knew that somehow in way, shape, and form, I could help improve, deeply felt like I could improve with a team behind me. I just wanted to allow myself enough room to explore that. And I think that's what a community like a South Park Commons or whatever that is for people, to try and see if you can do something that is a little bit different. And I think this goes back to my comment about really knowing yourself. it takes a while. It takes a while for you to understand, like, how are you really, really different from your peers? What are you just really, really, really good at? And just leaning into that more. And then for all the things that you're crappy at, like, that's what the team is for. It's, really getting into what you love working on. And that is like a luxury, no doubt. I'm at an age where I've had a few successes that afford me the luxury of being able to start a company. And I think that is the one big challenge for a lot of persons of color, immigrants, people who don't have that sort of financial stability. It is extremely difficult to say, hey, I can spend 2 to 3 years without any income and be totally cool with that. Not a lot of people can get there or make it there. And even for people that are early on joining to your team, they may not be able to get there. And so you really need to think about framing of how you want to spend your life. Your life is super short. You don't have a lot of like working years per se. How do you want to spend those hours? Who are the people that you want to spend those hours with? And then it becomes super clear.
A question for all the folks here, as women of color, how do you engage male allies? And then I'm going to take that one step further and say white women allies as well.
I'm going to ask a clarifying question. What do you mean by engage?
They did not specify that, but I'm going to put my own parameters on that. I think we all are very committed to creating space for other people of color, women of color in the sphere of health tech, whether that's investing in these entrepreneurs or hiring them if we have our companies. So I guess as you all kind of engage in a world that is inherently very white and very male, how do you sort of engage this predominant population that's in this field to help support the cause, essentially?
Thank you for the clarification. I'll steal a little bit of one of Jessica's answers where she said, be unapologetically yourself. So I'm not saying you need to raise the flag of the plight of women of color all day, every day. We could, but that would be exhausting because we live that experience. So in terms of allyship, I would talk about finding allies, and it's not necessarily a search. I think you find each other, similar to finding your tribe, so to speak, that's on your journey as a founder or an investor. So I'll call out 2 allies of mine who are on this Zoom. One is Max, who is a CTIP intern, who, full disclosure, really set up this Zoom from the CTIP and health tech DEI end in terms of the prep, coordinating with the panelists, and all those fun things that go into an online event that no one sees. And the second is Dr. Espinoza, my colleague at CTIP and founders of Health Tech DEI together. And so what's nice with both those male allies is what they have in common is sometimes it's helpful for folks to hear feedback from people who identify like them. And so if we want to get feedback as a team, let's say around investing in underrepresented founders, or saying that, perhaps this tactic is a little biased, or this is over-indexing on, let's say, men, or this certain type of founder in medtech. I don't necessarily want to be the person who has to fall on the sword and die on the hill for diversity all day, every day. And so it's really great to have an ally that knows when it's their turn to speak on, I would say, dare say, your behalf, but on behalf of the group that you identify with, but to someone else. So another male, for example. And that's been very helpful to me, both personally and professionally, because I think it's a lot if you have to do it all the time, and it also becomes distracting from doing your actual work as well.
Before we run out of time, I did want to leave a call to action for everyone on this line. So whether you are a woman of color, whether you are an ally, for all three of you, can you rapid fire just say one way that the folks on this line can support you in your work?
Follow our work. We are at New Media Ventures on Twitter. If you know of great founders who are looking for funding, send them our way. I think those are two major ways. And then obviously support the work that our portfolio is doing a lot of work in the progressive political field.
We would love for you to follow our social handles. They are Kintsugi Hello on Twitter and LinkedIn. And we do have a voice journaling application that we normally charge $20 on the Apple App Store, but we have taken down that price wall just for this event. And so if you are interested, please do download our app and provide any feedback that you have for it. We're always an open door. We really want to transform access to mental health care, and we actually listen to the feedback of all the emails and all the tweets and everything else. Even last night, I was responding to like some reviews at like, I don't know why, but like 1:30 or something in the morning, because we care. At the end of the day, we really, really care. And so we invite any sort of conversation anytime.
Thank you, Grace. We appreciate that. I'm downloading it. Kathryne.
Thanks. So for my one ask, I would ask everyone to, if you're interested in the work that I've described at Health Tech TEI, to visit our website at healthtechdei.com, which I dropped into the chat. If you fill out the contact us page, we'll record your information for both our newsletter, and you can share ways that you'd like to be involved. If you simply want to understand our work, if you think there are folks in your industry who'd be interested in changing the behavior of investors across the industry as a whole, please reach out. No reach out is too small. Or if you're simply like, hey, I don't know what this is and I want to learn more about this, how do you do the work that you do? We love having informational interviews and educating folks about the space. So please reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you all panelists. Thank you guys for attending this event. Really appreciate it. Until the next time. Bye, guys.